Alrighty, we are going to move into our next panel. Our communications professionals, please help me welcome Emily Bader, Senior Director of Marketing and Communications at Leap Innovations, Kira Keane, Managing Partner of External Relations at the Learning Accelerator, as well as Kate Westrich, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at KnowledgeWorks. Next slide, please. Alrighty, again, as grounding, we asked our communicators to present on this question. What are the effective strategies for communicating and disseminating findings from personalized learning research? And with that, I will turn things over to Emily to start. Emily?
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you all for being here. I am Emily Bader, and I have the great pleasure of leading marketing communications at Leap. For those of you who might not know Leap, we are a nonprofit organization in Chicago, and our focus is to catalyze innovation to help transform, important word for today, how students learn through personalized learning experiences. And we've worked with more than 140 schools here in Chicago, impacting nearly 40,000 kids and 2,400 educators by helping them sort of transform their approach to learning through our framework of personalized learning, which is all about being learner-focused, learner-led, learner-demonstrated, and learner-connected. And so on the next slide, I joined Leap about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. And my background is not in education, and it's not in education research by any means. My career had been focused on brand marketing communications for organizations like McDonald's and the Home Depot and Bertolli and lots of other brands throughout the 20+ years. And so when I joined Leap, I was awash with all kinds of data and reports and implementation research, the work that we had done with Aurora Institute to map personalized learning across the United States. And it was all obviously important, amazing work to undergird and show the rigor of our work and where it all fits in our society. But what I really thought was necessary as a complement was the human touch. And so how can you really focus on, not just in the brand marketing world, we said, okay, well, people don't share advertising taglines. What they share are stories. And so within the work and the construct of what we do, my question became, how do we actually elevate that human connection to the work? Going back to what Dr. Gilliam talked about at the very beginning of this meeting, how do we bring that H back into our communications? So knowing that on the next slide, we've got our communications strategies and our objectives with what we want to share, which of course is to show the progress of our work as an organization. To answer that age-old question that we all get as communicators, what does this work look like? And honestly, how can we make sure that people see personalized learning not just as kids in front of computers, but as the rich modalities of learning that enable that deeper connection to learning by the student? And how do we do that with our practices? How do we also address our opportunities and needs? And of course, as we think about all of our constituents, we do have a set, of course, that are very focused on the rigor of the research with which we're measuring our success. We also have parents, we also have lawmakers, we have reporters, we have various stakeholders that are not as in tune with the impressiveness of the research that we can bring to the table. So within all of our constituents, though, that there is a connection to a story and to that human touch. So that's what we endeavor to do with our impact stories. And on the next slide, what we did is really hone in on those stories and following a very traditional storytelling arc. You may have heard of Joseph Campbell and his idea of the hero's journey that he reported in the early 20th century. That idea that in a story you are wanting to address a challenge, a big rock to overcome, go through that journey of exploration as a hero, and how you're mining through the productive struggle of the work and what your mentors can tell you and teach you. And then finally, what is that victorious result? And in full disclosure, as we focus on these impact stories, we're really focusing on our success stories and our exemplars. But how do we actually bring all that to life in a way that's going to really connect with people as from an emotional standpoint and a human standpoint? So on the next slide, just to kind of tell you a couple of the stories that we have gone through, we look at transformation, and going back to that idea of transform how children learn. We really want to think about these stories as bringing the work into life to really illuminate those transformations. So from a whole school perspective, and we'll share the story in a second, we looked at the redesign work of Belmont Cragen Elementary School and the process through which they went to create the incredible experience that they have for learning today. We went to Stagg School of Excellence in Englewood in Chicago, and we learned about Dion. And Dion is an 8th grader who had a lot of trauma in his life, most notably the death of his older brother, who was his idol. And we talked about the ways that with Stagg's transformation to personalized learning on a whole school basis, they focused on social and emotional learning and how their inputs helped Dion develop that agency, that leadership, help him manage through his trauma and become a real leader in the school environment. And another example is focusing on Steve McQuaid, who through LEAP really honed his practice on relationship building in a huge way. And so his story was 34 kids, 34 ways, all the ways that he could really connect with students on a deeper level, and what the impact of that was, not just for the students, of course, but also for him as an educator. So on the final slide, and big shout out, of course, to our partners, NGLC. I wanted to show how our impact story with Belmont Cragen really married with the simultaneous release that we did of our evaluation through the Wisconsin Evaluation Collaborative, which was a deep implementation study of our Breakthrough Schools Chicago program that, again, we partnered with NGLC to bring to life. This story with Belmont Cragen, while they were not a breakthrough school, it just talked through how they transformed their environment, their practice, their whole way of working, their culture, to really bring personalized learning to life. So without further ado, I'll let you see the story for yourself.
Imagine walking into a classroom, you see paint crumbling from the walls, outdated materials. Kids had to stand in a particular position to have permission even to enter into the classroom. It was not conducive for learning. When I got here in 2010, we really had to come together as a team, as a village.
Would anybody like to help out with those projects?
Yeah. Parents, for the first time, were helping to problem solve alongside school administration. Together, we set 2 guiding questions. What do we want for our students, and what are we going to do when they struggle? We were trying to do some really bold things to shift towards personalized learning.
Awesome. I'll be honest with you, in the beginning, I was like, what are they doing? This work is scary when you've not seen it before. You're just very unsure. Mrs. Stewart helped us to see that there was something bigger out there.
We worked with Leap Innovations to create a whole school blueprint for personalized learning that was a 5-year plan. Teachers were constantly collaborating. We designed an individualized profile for each of the children so we know their academic, but we also know their social and emotional needs.
Something big is just like how the teachers have changed. They understand you. If you're having a bad day, you don't feel like you have to hold everything in.
I've seen her come out of her shell more.
A lot.
Because she has that one-on-one with the teacher. If she's struggling, she's not afraid to ask questions. It doesn't feel like a school, it feels like a family.
We started having monthly Bring Your Parent to School days. Parents got to hear from their own child, how am I doing? We removed all of the furniture from all the classrooms. And the teachers design each classroom to really meet the needs of those students in their learning environment. Everything that we put in that particular blueprint, we actually accomplish. Going from pilot classrooms, teachers training other teachers, changing our schedules, we've been able to expand to an entire school within 5 years.
The biggest change, there's so much student ownership. You can set goals for yourself and you know where you are without the teacher having to tell you. Nice job.
They start off as students, but they come out as leaders. To build more student voice, we have student-led meetings on a weekly basis.
If you can hear my voice, clap once. At first, when I started doing morning meetings, I would get really nervous. Good morning, Belmont Craig and Tigers. I would be like really shy, but now it just comes naturally.
I'm gonna get choked up. Kids that didn't feel confident in themselves at all are now walking away with a level of confidence that you can be proud of.
Every child in this school has the opportunity to grow and develop, and that only came from this personalized learning journey.
Yeah, so again, with that story, I think you can see that it is by no means a replacement for the rigorous research that Dr. Jill conducts with our team, with our partners and partners like the Lowenstein Foundation. But it does add that level of heart that really connects with people and connects them to the power of the work. So that's one way that we do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. Really speaking our language. That was absolutely a story worth telling. So thank you for that. We're going to turn things over now to Kira.
That was great, Emily. I think I'm getting a little choked up actually myself. And I'm super excited to be able to speak next because I think the case study I'm going to share with you is a nice compliment and it's super tactical. So this is the title, the official title of our session, but on the next slide, I actually have my title, which is, if you go to the next slide, make it accessible, right? What is with a quick way that I can encourage you to make this type of research that we're all depending on or in fact doing accessible to the folks that really need to hear it and to understand it. Next slide quickly. I'm Kira Keane. I'm a managing partner at TLA, the Learning Accelerator. I've been around actually with TLA for about 7 years, almost since the beginning. So we're a national nonprofit. And we've been remote from the beginning. So I'm out in California, but we have other partners all over the country. Next slide. Our mission, for those of you who don't know TLA and the Learning Accelerator, we envision a world like many of you where every student is going to receive an effective and equitable and engaging education. Next slide. We do this work by connecting teachers and leaders to the tools that they need, the networks they need, and the knowledge they need to make this vision a reality. On the next slide, we like to say that we work hard to make the potential really practical and possible for students and teachers everywhere. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about, oh, actually, I put this slide in here. It's a little bit dense, but I did want to sort of capture the fact that TLA tries to work as a learning engine for the field. So we do this in several ways. We capture and create, along with educators, best practices, and we do research like we'll talk about in a minute. We work really hard to create networks and connections so that we can all be learning together. And finally, we actively share these learnings, not only our own, but others. And everything TLA actually produces, we license under a Creative Commons license. So it is free to use, it's free to share, it's even free to modify with attribution. So in any of the work that I share with you today or that you discover, just please know it's always available for you to use and to share. Next slide. It's very strange not owning my own slides. Okay, so some of the key things that TLA produces, we have a variety of tools. Some of these may be familiar to you. We partner with many of the organizations that are here on the call today to create tools. Again, as we mentioned, we have a lot of very active networks among schools, among professional service providers, among researchers. And then to the point we're talking about today, we also are involved with research. And so today, on the next slide, I want to give you a little bit of a case study on how we've engaged with a project out of Lindsay, California. And many of you may have attended the previous session where Dr. Beth Holland and Amalia Lopez. Dr. Beth Holland runs our research wing, and she may be on the call. And Amalia Lopez from Lindsay have been working together. Oh, good, she's here. For the past 3 years. So Lindsay Unified School District, it's an amazing school district in Central California, very high English language learners, free and reduced lunch. But in 2017, they received a federal teacher and student grant. And that grant was specifically to look at professional learning strategies around educator recruitment and capacity and retention. And Lindsay's sort of framing strategy is that they wanted to create what they had done for their students. So for the past 10 years, they've been building an incredibly rigorous professional learning program for their students. They wanted to mirror that for their teachers, right? They wanted professional learning for their educators to be mastery-based, to be personalized, and to be data-driven. And then specifically, if you go to the next slide, what Lindsay partnered with TLA to look at was how do we unpack, we call it the sort of black box. How do we unpack the black box to see what kind of professional learning opportunities actually impact student outcomes and student achievement? So there'd been lots of studies about professional learning alone, lots of studies about student achievement, but could we potentially link those by looking at what strategies for professional learning work well and for whom and how? So the outputs, if you go to the next slide, clearly, oh, actually, right, district goals. This is important. So Lindsay had 5 district goals for this type of research, but I just wanted to kind of flag 2 points here. And this goes to something Emily actually had said. When we came to think about how would we communicate around the learnings and the findings from this research, we really wanted to be sure that we were clear on who the audiences were. And so in looking at this district goals, there's clearly the research goal, but there was also a goal to inform this sort of broader field of personalized learning. And so that broader field is going to include a lot of people who aren't steeped in research or research language. They also wanted to really inform the development of educators, not only their own Lindsay teachers, but also teachers in the field. So again, a really distinct audience that's going to necessitate a different approach in terms of packaging and dissemination for the research findings. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what have been so far the outputs of this research partnership with Lindsay? And I'll just say that it's also ongoing, as Lindsay did just receive an additional 2-year grant for this work, so that's super exciting. But the first sort of obvious output is we have published, I think it's 6 research papers to date. Dr. Beth Holland sometimes calls them research briefs, but I'm not sure why, because they're often about 80 pages long, but we'll call them what she likes, research papers or briefs. But looking tactically at these research papers, which can be quite dense, we had a couple tricks or recommendations, I should say, for making them a little bit more accessible. So if you go to the next slide, not brain science, not rocket science, but little editorial things, note boxes that might explain a complicated concept, really working hard to have sort of final takeaways, summations, being sure that we have standalone executive summaries. Yes, Beth is saying that it is 80 pages, but it includes references. I know we may have this argument going on throughout this entire presentation. But editorially, there's things you can do to at least make the studies themselves, the reports themselves, a little bit more skimmable for those that aren't going to be digging into the super deep details. Next slide, please. Yes, that was another example of a little call out box that we have used. Next slide, please. So packaging. So I mentioned this before, we worked really hard to make sure that we always had a standalone executive summary. So not just an executive summary that would be within the research report, but a standalone summary that would be very crisp, would be graphic, and offer a sort of at a glance where possible what we had learned. We also did videos, which we found were very helpful, especially for our educators. So for the Lindsay team, as they were trying to explain what the findings have been over the past 3 years, providing 2-minute, 3-minute videos to teachers was really helpful. This was also helpful for us when we were pitching to the media, and for background on what the project was, to be able to attach a brief overview video. And this got a little bit also to some of the storytelling that Emily mentioned. You know, we could have pictures of the students and the teachers and capture some of that teacher voice and student voice around the work that we were doing around personalized professional learning. Next slide, please. This is something that TLA, the Learning Accelerator, has committed to and worked very hard, which is to make all of our content digitally accessible and accessible in the sense of assistive technologies. And so we are very careful to make sure all images have alt text, that especially infographics, watch out for infographics. If you've got text within an image, we're making sure that we add alt text to that. And we also provide, so this is just a little snapshot from the web page where we have everything listed. We'll have a summary of the research report, we'll have the executive summary, we'll have the full report, and then we always provide an accessible version that is easy to download and for anyone to be able to access the information. There's a link to the Web Accessibility Initiative that has sort of some generic guidelines around accessibility, and I'm happy to talk with others about that later as well. Next slide, please. So with all of these reports that we were doing and videos, we wanted to make sure that we had a central landing place. So we did create a landing page on our site that Lindsay can use, and Lindsay can mirror it on their site. But just to house this information, it wasn't as much that we thought folks would come to it and discover it, though that would be great if people are cruising around looking for this work on TLA site, but just as a way to sort of have it all in one place and be able to provide some framing and context. So not having your various reports and work that you're putting out there floating all over, but housed in some accessible location is really important. Next up. We did, again, thinking about different audiences, we did several videos that pulled apart elements of these reports and tried to make the information as modular as possible. So for certain elements around the instructional look-fors, which Lindsay had developed with Summit Learning, and I believe it was Transcend, there's a brief video there. We also, in terms of reporting, had to do reporting to the feds, and they seem to like PDFs. So we had to do a lot of at a glance, graphic representation of studies, outcomes, impacts, and other materials. So what you're getting and you're seeing here is just a very robust and rich type of information packaging and dissemination. Next slide. So I noticed in our very first exercise where folks were putting in ideas in the chat around blog posts and stories, and we have found this very effective in terms of trying to get the learnings from the research, which can be sort of daunting if you're just going to go through those research reports, out into the world through blog posts or media stories. So some outlets are much more amenable to meaty reporting. You know, we've been able to put some stuff out in like Getting Smart and Heckinger and other places that let us go deep with some of the research-based recommendations. There's other outlets that I won't perhaps name, but you'll see on the slide here that, you know, have 1 million teacher followers, but tend to be a tad clickbaity, I guess I would say. And so it's not always as comfortable to have your educators writing for an outlet like this, because perhaps you have to synthesize so deeply. But it's a balance between being able to highlight key information and also access your audience. And as I told Beth, at least we didn't go with the title that was, what does Kim Kardashian think of Lindsay Unified's personalized learning resources? So, so it's great to be able to reach out to a very broad universe of media outlets, and you will have to adjust your language accordingly. Next slide. And then I think at this, maybe I think almost final slide. I think at first when I came to thinking about this project with Lindsay Unified and just the scope and scale of the research and the depth of the research, I was uncertain if social media would be an effective dissemination platform. But what we found, and this is something that Beth Holland certainly encouraged us to do, and again ties into, I think, Emily's point about storytelling, is that capturing the voice of teachers and students and educators, having some sort of, having as much qualitative research as you can include in these studies is really critical to be able to bring out that human connection, as Emily was talking about. So what we went in and just, when we had the opportunity to pull out quotes from teachers, there was some really powerful work that came out of our most recent study. Putting those up on social media was a great hook, and it was a great way to sort of capture some eyes that perhaps hadn't been looking for this work or hadn't known about this work. So my recommendation would be, don't be afraid of social media. And there can be ways, especially with your qualitative research, that it can be really effective. Next slide. I think that might be our last slide. Yes. So also open to any questions, and I know we'll have a breakout room as well. And I was not able to look at the chat, so if there was anything in there, it looks like Beth was covering it for me.
You got it. You got it. Thank you, Kira. This was fantastic. Really, really wonderful recommendations and takeaways from that. So appreciate that very much. We're going to move now to Kate, and then we're going to get into the breakout rooms after that. So let me turn things over to Kate.
Hello, I'm Kate Westrick. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at KnowledgeWorks, and I'm excited to talk to you because our presentations are also similar but so different. So if you can go to the next slide for me. My focus is going to be on telling stories through data or telling data through stories. I think it can work either way. And the approaches we take are sharing data often and sharing data in different ways and combining that as much as we can so that we can reach the broadest set of audiences. If you go to the next slide for me. At KnowledgeWorks, we partner with learning communities to create purposeful paths and places to ensure each student graduates ready for what's next. We rely on evidence-based practices and a commitment to equitable outcomes, and with that, we're creating the future of learning together. But explaining that evidence and those outcomes, I think, can be hard to do, and even more so when you're doing it with audiences outside of education. So I wanted to share an example of where we partnered with a school district and what our different approaches were for sharing the data that came from that work. Next slide. So we have partnered with Marysville Exempted Village School District in Marysville, Ohio for many years. In 2017, they went with personalized competency-based learning district-wide. One of the things that they are tracking data with is with a student experience survey. That looks at 4 different metrics. So belonging, hopefulness, engagement, and ability to self-manage. I think these are beautiful concepts. They're also kind of warm and fuzzy. So sharing that data is tricky. And I think having it resonate with different audiences has been a challenge, but also a fun one. So if you go to the next slide, this is how the district is sharing the data, and it works. And I could have shared a different slide for this where it's more numbers based, but they're being very transparent, which I think is wonderful. Not everybody can read data through graphs and charts and the numbers. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see where we partnered with our graphic designer to do a different version of that. I'm not sure if I call this an infographic or not, but by removing some of the data, we were able to show the leap and demonstrate progress in a more visual way. And I do think that this tells the story of what's happening in the district, but it also misses some pieces. And it misses the piece that I feel like resonates with people the most. So if you go to the next slide, what I'm showing here are just actual photographs of students from our districts, from that district. These are students at Tri-Academy in Marysville, Ohio. It's an alternative school for students who are struggling to earn their credits towards graduation. One young woman who graduated this past spring described the school as, a lot of us had lost hope because we were not bad kids, but we weren't very good in school. Whatever the case was, we were behind. But our teachers have given us a lot of hope for the future, not only for school, but hope in things we want to do when we're older. And so these are like the troubled kids of the district. And when you look at all the photographs, they are happy, they are engaged, and they are supported by each other. And it's really obvious in the photographs. And I do think that's a different way to tell the story. And that can be done on social media, that can be done in written pieces. If you go to the next slide, we tried to pull all these elements together in a series of stories that we shared online. We have a beautiful writer on staff who can explain all of this in prose, and I think that is wonderful when you can do it. I do also think it's easier when you have the data to show and you can show it in different ways. So that way you're not just explaining what the facts are, but you're telling it through pictures, you're telling it through data points and infographics. And so the more different ways you can tell that story, the better. This story was really popular on our site, and it was used by the district as well, which I think was useful. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you another version of some storytelling efforts we're doing. So Drake Bryan, who works with our team focused on impact and improvement, has a series called Data with Drake. I wish I could explain why and how crazily popular this series is and how many visits it gets online. And I don't think it's just the Bitmoji little picture we made of him, but that everybody seems to like that too. What Drake has been doing is interviewing people, and through the Q&A sessions, without having a big writing background, that's not what his area of focus is, he's able to share data in such a casual, approachable way that has been wildly successful. I think a lot of times I get caught up in the accuracy of the data and making sure I have all the different points. And his posts have just been plain English, like this is just how it works. And it resonates with people quite a bit. Thank you. Rebecca just shared a link to that. And so this is an ongoing series, one that we try to pressure him to do more of because it is so popular online. But I also think it's relatively easy. He can just do it through a series of emails back and forth, compile them into one digital post. If you can go to the next slide for me. So at KnowledgeWorks, we say we're creating the future of learning together. And when we say together, I actually think we mean everybody who's here right now, everybody at all of our partner districts. We might be going in different directions and have slightly different goals, but ultimately we're all trying to create a better future of learning for the learners in our community, however we define that. And the data and types of things we're discussing here today, I think are part of that. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to share a preview of something we're working on right now. Normally I don't do this, but I'm more on Thursday. So we are, oh, I'm sorry, a bit of an echo. We are sharing compelling data that's coming from the field, and we're going to be putting that on our Students at the Center hub. On that site, we feature research and resources that are all focused on student-centered learning. On the feature we're creating now, we're going to share data from the field, not necessarily KnowledgeWorks partners, just good research, so we can promote just what's happening in personalized learning, just what's happening in student-centered learning. And we want to help make it easier for other people to share that data. So when you go to that site, you'll be able to find slides and images so that you can share things easily. You can submit data to be included, and we'll be sharing our own data there as well. And that site, Kira, I thought what you said was really important. We recently relaunched it and it's accessible. So we're trying to keep a focus on that too, because I do think that is essential as websites are going forward. So I don't know for sure when this I will know more on Thursday when this page will launch, but I'm really excited for how we will be able to help each other with data. I know I often wish I had a data point on a certain thing, so to be able to get that from somebody else would be great too. And then I think my next slide is just the last slide, and it will have links to our websites where that information will be, and our Twitter handles, which is one way to find out when that content launches.
Fantastic, Kate. Thank you for that so much. Very much looking forward to seeing that go online. So appreciate you sharing and appreciate everyone sharing. Please, everyone, let's offer some appreciation to Kate, Kira, and Emily. We are going to now, yes, absolutely. We're going to now move into breakout rooms. Let's move to the next slide, please. You are going to be pre-assigned to a room this time. So if you were with us earlier, you know that you could have chosen, but this time we're going to pre-assign you. And we're going to limit our time to about 8 minutes with this question. And I also want to let you know that we're going to tighten up a little bit on our closing session. We want to respect your time and commit to giving everybody a very quick presentations and whetting your appetite for more. So the question we'd like you to kind of workshop some of the things that you've learned today is, what are 2 ways your organization could improve its communication of personalized learning research? So think about all the things that we've shared today. And I'd like you to pay particular attention to audiences. Kate and Kira and Emily shared a lot about tailoring messages to particular audiences. And if you could, we could also talk a little bit about how you know your communications are effective. How do you know you've done the work of effectively communicating personalized research to all of your respective publics, as we say in communications? I am sharing in the in the chat box, a Google Doc that can help us collaborate and learn from each other. So if you would like, it's a place to just jot down some notes. It's not required, but it will be great to offer some support to all of our participants on ways that they could go about improving their communications. So Jessica, if you will, please open our breakout rooms and give us 8 minutes along with a 1-minute warning to come back. Thank you, everybody.
I'll catch you next month.
That was so flip. I'm so sorry. That was such a flip thing to end on. Sorry about that.
We are experiencing the exact same thing. So right midstream, 8 minutes goes by really fast, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it was really rich discussion that we were having, and I can see by the Google document that it was really rich discussion in all of the other rooms as well. So feel free to take this document, refer back to it, download it, share it as much as you would like. And again, I would just really want to appreciate all of our panelists. Please help me thank again Cedric, Ruth, Jeff, Emily, Kira, Kate. It has been really a pleasure connecting with you, collaborating with you, and learning from you. Your contributions have just been wonderful. And so I hope this session has sparked some ideas for everyone, for all of our participants to take back to their respective communities and put these ideas into action. So I am going to now hand the mic back to Elliot. Thank you very much, everyone.